Good morning. I'm Cherry Marks. I'm your local Nazarene Missions International president. And this past week, I've had the opportunity to meet two wonderful people, to make new friends. They have reminded me that you do not have to be called to preach or to be a medical doctor to be used by God. God can use who we are and where we are for his glory. Jon's background's in accounting, and Shirley's background is in teaching. Yet God called them to serve him as missionaries in Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador. Jon and Shirley have served faithfully as work and witness coordinators for the North Andean Field, which brought them into the Long Beach Family Nazarene Church, in the Long Beach First Nazarene Church family in 2011. They intersected with our history again when Heidi Nichols Reed, daughter of Jon and Jean Nichols, traveled with the Loveworks team from Point Loma Nazarene University to Ecuador in 2015. And if you wanted to see a display of either of those teams, 2015 or 2011, Jean Nichols has put up a beautiful display in the back of the church foyer. At this time, it's my privilege to introduce to you Jon and Shirley Fischer.
Thank you. It is good to be here, and it was good to share in Sunday school this morning a little bit more. We have been, as she said, 29 years. We were 15 years in Venezuela, and then we moved to Ecuador 14 years ago. And now we've come back, and our 30th year, we're traveling around all over the United States speaking in churches. And so this is not my favorite part, but it's a privilege to share what God's doing. I prefer to be out there building the churches, not speaking in them as an accountant. Before I get too far into this, I want to mention we have a table set up out there in the lobby, and on that are a couple important things to us. One is our prayer card. If you'd be willing to pray for us as we finish out this year going around and sharing in churches, please take one of those. The other thing we have out there is our daughter Krista and her husband Angel and our grandson Samuel, their card. They are now being sent to, or were sent in January to Ecuador to take over the work we left behind. And they are the new work and witness coordinator. So if you'd pray for them as well, please take that. I like to say, if you really, wherever you hang your prayer cards, if you only got room for one, take theirs. All right? Because they're just starting out and they're finding that it may not be as easy as they thought it would be. And then as well, we have these little bookmarks, or some people think they're bracelets. That's fine too. But this one says Venezuela. Just a reminder to pray for the people in the churches in Venezuela. I'm surprised this one says Venezuela. We don't have many of those, but most of them are Ecuador, some are Colombia, and then again Venezuela, from what we call the North Andean Field, Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela. When I get introduced as the missionary, sometimes I wonder, does everybody know what a missionary is? Do people have different ideas of what a missionary is or what we do? I know I grew up in the Nazarene church and I read missionary books, loved reading missionary books, but I always thought a missionary was going to be one of four things: a preacher, teacher, doctor, or nurse. Because I knew we sent missionary pastors out there to plant the churches, teachers for our schools and our seminaries, and then doctors and nurses, of course, to our clinics. I graduated from Mid-America Nazarene University with an accounting degree. Did not think I would be going to the mission field. I had no plan to go to the mission field. Didn't think that was in my future. And so I have been awakened to the need, actually, for a lot of different jobs on the mission field, accounting being one of them, work and witness coordinators being one of them. But, you know, I always thought missionaries, and over the years I've thought, boy, if missionaries had certain characteristics, that would sure make them better missionaries. And one is the ones that like to get up in front of churches and speak, and as I said, this is not my favorite part of the job. In fact, I get so nervous up here, I'll probably forget to say a lot of things that I wanted to say. But missionaries, if they could be the ones that like to do this part, that would be so easy for them. Another thing I think about missionaries, especially in South America, if they could be what I call the meter-greeter types. They're the ones that can go in a room and just meet everybody and greet them and talk to them and I'm thinking Wes right there, Wes Sullivan. He's the meter-greeter type. If you know Wes, you know he's the meter-greeter. But, you know, missionaries need to do that, especially in South America. Shirley's a lot better at that, and sometimes, well, she'll push me out there to do that, but I'm not real good at it. You know, in South America, I found out over the last number of years in Ecuador, that they don't really consider it a greeting unless you touch the person. You have to shake their hand. You have to, the guys and the ladies have to, they have to kiss on the cheek. The ladies and the ladies kiss on the cheek. Now, guys and guys, we don't kiss on the cheek. That's Argentina. That's not Ecuador. But, you know, and during COVID, that's messed them all up because now they found out they couldn't do a lot of that. And so they actually, to touch, they do a fist bump or they do an elbow bump or sometimes they even do a foot bump and kick each other. But it's really, they don't consider it a greeting unless you touch them. And now I've got some workers, and I was in my shop at the seminary, and I was welding one day, and I was trying to build some trusses. So my mask was down, I had my gloves on, and I'm welding away, and one of my workers came in, and he was standing behind me, and so I kind of sensed him there, and I flipped my shield up, and I said, "Hey, good morning, let's get to work, we got a lot to do today." And he just stood there. And I said, "Okay, let's get to work." And he's like, you gotta give me a greeting. And I knew immediately what he wanted. He wanted me to take my gloves off and shake his hand and do the official greeting. And I said, "Man, we don't have time for that. Let's just get to work. If we're outside the shop, yeah, we'll do that official greeting. We'll touch, we'll do the handshake. But inside the shop, let's just get busy." And he said, "Oh, but no." And I had to go. I said, "Look, let me explain my culture a little bit." I said, "Hey, you can walk into a room, and all you do is just go, 'Hey,' and that covers the room. You don't have to go touch everybody." And he's shaking his head going, "That's not a greeting. That doesn't work." And I said, "Let me go a little further." And I said, "Hey, if you're with a group of guys, you can just kind of give a little head nod, and that covers the room." He says, "No way is that a greeting." And I said, "Well, I know what you want. You want me to take my gloves off, shake your hand, but hey, let's just get busy. Outside the shop, okay, we'll do that." I found out when I go in the office in the morning, I have to greet everybody. If I don't, they just come busting in my office to get that greeting. And then I found out if I leave the building at the end of the day and I don't ungreet everybody on the way out, I hear about that the next day. You know, it's just that greeting's important, especially where we were in South America. And so people, I think, if they're those meter-greeter types, man, they would make awesome missionaries. Another thing I think about missionaries, they're going to be the ones that can learn languages quickly, easily. There are people that are gifted at that. Shirley and I are not two of those people. We have been struggling to learn Spanish for 29 years. People ask us, "You got to be fluent by now after 29 years. No, we're a long ways from that. And I think there's people that they can just hear it and hear a new language, and man, they're speaking another language. And I'm like, how do you do that? But you know, those should be the missionaries. Our daughters, they're fluent in Spanish. They were 1 and 3 when we went to Ecuador, or to Venezuela. And they grew up learning Spanish, and so they're fluent in Spanish. My older daughter, she likes to give me a little hard time sometimes. She'll hear me speaking my Spanish, and, "Oh, Dad, that's kind of embarrassing. That's not how you say that." But I give her a hard time too because, see, they learned Spanish. They would go out in the park as kids with the neighborhood kids, and they would come in with new words, and then I'd have to call up the local pastor and find out if those words were good words or bad words. And many times they were words they should not repeat. And so I would have to say, "Okay, girls, erase those. You can't use those." So I give my daughter, I say, "Hey, you know, you learned park Spanish, and that really doesn't help in the church all the time." So we give each other a hard time. But, you know, missionaries, if they could be the ones that are gifted to learn Spanish, that would sure help them. One last thing I think about, missionaries are going to be the ones that like to try new and different foods. I mean, there's people, I go to restaurants sometimes and I'll hear comment like, "Oh, look, something new on the menu. I should try that." Why? Why do you have to do that? Why not just stick with what you've always had that you know is good? But I hear people and they want to come down on work teams and they want to try new foods. And, you know, I had an opportunity a number of years ago. I went down in the southern part of Ecuador with our director. We were going to visit some of our churches in the Shuar community. Now, the Shuar Indians are known in history over time because they're headhunters. Thank goodness the government of Ecuador had outlawed headhunting, and so we can go in to visit our church people and know that we're going to come back out that day with heads still attached. But that day we were going in, and they said, "Oh, man, we're so excited you're here today, so we've got a special meal for you after church." And I was like, "Oh, no, what is that going to be?" So after church, we went around behind the church where they were setting up, and they brought out the main course, which was monkey. I had not had monkey up to that time, actually not had it since either. But it was something new to try, and it really wasn't bad, and so I'm like, okay. And then they brought out the drink, their special drink called chicha, and I'd known chicha in Venezuela to be a rice and milk drink, and so I'm like, okay, I'm good with chicha. But I didn't know that the Shuar make their chicha just a little bit different. What they use as the base is yuca. Yuca is a root like potato, and they take that. We've actually had yuca fried and boiled in soups, and it's pretty good. Fried, it's like French fries, so it's really good. But they give the yuca to the ladies in the community, and they will take it and they will chew it up, and then they spit it out in a bowl, and they take that bowl and they set it out in the sun to get warm and ripe and smelling horrible. And then, because we're visitors, we get to stand in a circle and pass that bowl around and take a drink. Yeah, it was not good. But as a missionary, we get the opportunity to try new things. And I'll have team members that come down, and the very first night they'll say, hey, what's a food or drink that here in Ecuador that we don't have in the States that we could try while we're here? And I'm thinking, why would they want to do that? But those would make good missionaries. They should be in the missionary box. And I found out that I've kind of created this box that all missionaries, if they were good missionaries, they would fit in the box. And what I realized over time is really God doesn't have a box. God doesn't look at the ones that fit in the box. God looks at our heart. God looks at us, asks, are you willing? Are you able? Are you answering my call? And he calls people to serve. And I think a lot of times we shorten ourselves in our ability to serve because I think we've put boxes around a lot of different ministries. Maybe the pastoral ministry we have, okay, to be a pastor you kind of got to look like a certain way, or to be working with the youth or the kids, okay, it's got to be these people. Pastor will stand up and say, well, we got Vacation Bible School, we need some helpers, and immediately our mind goes to, okay, help by God. There's got to be this kind of people to help in Vacation Bible School. Well, really what we need to do is just say, Lord, are you speaking to me? Could I be a helper? I believe that when God calls us, he will equip us and enable us to do the tasks that he's calling us to do. Whether we fit in any kind of box or not, when God calls, he'll make it possible. Well, I went on a work and witness trip a long time ago, 1989, my first trip. We went to Venezuela. I felt God saying, get more involved in missions. Shirley wasn't on that trip, and so I went home and I said, hey, I feel God saying we need to be more involved in missions. And so I thought, I'm an accountant, so that must mean more in the offering plate and maybe more work and witness trips. And I was okay with that, and we did a few more trips. But a couple years later, again, I went back to Venezuela, and I was able to work with the missionary there that was building the churches. He didn't fit in the box. He was building churches. I had all kinds of questions. I spent the whole day asking him questions about how he got there and what he did and how did he prepare and how did he learn the language, just a whole day of questions. Get to the end of the day, and he said, now I've answered all your questions all day. I got one question for you. I said, go ahead. He said, when is the last time that you've stepped out in faith, not knowing how you would accomplish what God was asking you to do unless you allowed God to do it through you? And I thought immediately, well, it can't be too hard of a question. I grew up in the church, and I know about faith, and I kind of got stuck. Because for me, I have always, as an accountant, I always have to put the numbers down on the paper. I have to see if it balances. I have to see if the resources are there. I have to see if I have the ability to do whatever is being asked. I never realized that if you can figure it out on your own, if you have all the resources, that's not a step of faith. A step of faith is where you can't figure it out and you have to say, God, I hear you calling. I don't know how it's going to happen, but I got to follow you, and I'm praying that you will make it happen through me. Step of faith. So I told the missionary, couldn't think of a time. He said, why don't you think about coming back to the mission field for a longer term, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months, see what missions is all about. I went home from that trip. Shirley wasn't with me, but I went home and I said, oh, that crazy missionary, he thinks we should quit our jobs and move to the mission field. Didn't seem like that would be a possibility. But we started praying, God, what do you want to do? What is a step of faith for us? And we felt that God was leading us to step out in faith, and so in 1992 we moved to Venezuela for what we thought would be 1 year as volunteers on the mission field. That 1 year became 2, and then 8 years as volunteers, and then the church put us on contract, which meant we did the same thing, but now we're getting paid. 29 years on the mission field. I believe that had God said back in the beginning, hey, you're going to be a missionary, go to the mission field 29 years, I would have said, no, not me. Take the one in the box. Take the one that will be the missionary, that knows, that wants to do that. I wasn't called to be a missionary. But God just said, hey, I need you. I need you to follow me, and I will equip you and enable you to do the job I'm asking. And we've been blessed over the last 29 years. We've been on the field. We've been working with a lot of work and witness teams. And some of you have been on teams. Shirley put a video together for us that I want to show. Shows a lot of what we did with our teams. And then she threw in at the end a bunch of pictures from our very first year in Venezuela back in 1992. So if I can show that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the work we were doing with teams and one of our district superintendents as he planted churches. Back when we first went to the mission field in 1992, I knew our job was to build churches. I knew our job was to get the buildings done. A team would come down. We wanted to do as much as we could to build a building. They always want to complete as much as possible, take pictures, go home, get the church back home excited about what they've done. And I've now tell the teams, every team I worked with recently, I've said, hey, you guys have come to build a church. And if we have time, we'll work on the building. Because the building's not the priority, the church, the people, that's the priority. And so as we worked, I knew back in the beginning, as I said, the priority for me was the building. And there would be a lot of kids on the job site. You saw in the pictures a lot of kids, but they would always come to the job site. And I would tell Shirley, hey, we've got to move these kids off the job site because we got stuff to do. We don't want the kids getting hurt. So we move them off. Well, we found out that we can't just move the kids off the job site, but that's an opportunity where we can do ministry with those kids. Vacation Bible schools and different sporting activities, and we can work with those kids. By the time we left Venezuela after 15 years, those kids that were on the job site when we first got there that were 4 and 5, by the time we left, they were 20 years old. Those are a lot of our pastors in South America by that age. And so it's not just push the kids aside, but let's do some ministry with those kids. And Shirley, as a school teacher, she was very good at developing ministries and for those kids. I found out over about the last 10 years, we've been building a lot more buildings that are 2-story. And I found out that having all those kids on the job site really is not such a bad thing. When you have a pile of about 1,000 blocks that have to go up to the second floor, man, it's great having those kids. They'll grab a block and they'll run up the stairs and they run back down for another one and run up with another one. The really little kids, two of them at a time will grab a block and they'll run it up together and then come back down for another one. I got team members, adults, man, they'll grab a block and up they go up the stairs. They don't ever come down. I have to go up looking for them. I get up there, I find out they are working. They're actually grabbing the blocks from the kids and they're strategically placing them around where we're going to lay up the walls and working together with those kids. But those kids are so excited to be helping build part of their church. And I know at the end of the day, they go home and they tell their neighbors, their friends, they say, man, I was over at the church today and the Americans were there and they let me help build the church. They let me help carry blocks or move sand or whatever they're doing. Those kids are saying, man, tomorrow you got to come with me because I want you to be part of this. This is exciting. I think I've realized that those kids are like little evangelists. Man, they're so excited to go out and tell their friends and bring their friends to church because they want their friends to be part of that. I think as adults sometimes we need to think more like that. Things are happening at church and God's moving in our lives and man, are we running out to tell our neighbors what's going on? We need to have that attitude. We need to be running out there and saying, man, things are happening. We got something exciting at church today. Please come with me. I want you to be part of that. We got to have that attitude. We have a district superintendent, and he's planted 19 churches in the 7 years before COVID. He would still be doing it, but those 2 years during COVID, he's had to stop because he couldn't go out around his district. And now things are opening up again, and he's excited to go back out and plant more churches. District superintendent's name is Mario Paredes, and because he's the superintendent, I just shorten it Super Mario. And Super Mario is planting these churches, and he's gone into a partnership with Compassion International. And as he's worked with Compassion, their focus is on helping kids. And they partner with churches because they know the church's focus is on saving or getting the kids saved and getting to know Jesus Christ. Compassion International is more, they want to help the kids, but we want to help the families. We want to help the families come to know Christ. And so Compassion International, we've had programs in some of our churches, and they sponsor so that we can feed kids. And it's up to our churches to reach out and get to know the families and present Christ to the families and to those kids. And so Mario has had programs on his district, and then Compassion came to Mario 9 years ago, and they said, hey, we want to work with kids out in the community, but we have no way to do that because there's no churches out in those communities. Would you be willing to start a church out in those communities so that we can have you work with kids out there? And so Mario and Compassion came up with this plan that Compassion would sponsor the kids, and then Mario could use a list of 200 kids to plant a church. Well, you know, if we're starting with 200 kids and they all have parents and grandparents and brothers and sisters, that's a big group. But the idea is to go out and get them and bring them into our church and help them find Jesus Christ. We've been out working on some of these projects to build some buildings, and I've had an opportunity to walk down the street with the pastor, and he's greeting everybody. We're headed to the hardware store, and he's greeting everybody along the way, and I'm just like, Pastor, you've only been here a couple months in this town. How do you know all these people? He said, oh, they're all the parents of the kids in my program. I've been to their houses, I've talked to them, I've met them. I ask them how I can pray for them, and I'm getting to know the parents and the families and the kids, and our goal is to let them know that we're there and we're bringing Jesus Christ to them so that they can have what we have. And Mario's planted these 19 churches, so as we've been working with him, we said, Pastor Mario, how is it that you have this drive to plant all these churches? None of our other districts are working that hard, and he's always on the road and going to places and picking new places. And we said, Mario, what is the deal? Why is this so important to you? And he said, well, it kind of goes back to my testimony. I grew up in a family, and it wasn't a Christian family. He said my dad was an alcoholic, and literally he abused me and my brothers and sisters and my mom. He'd come home drunk, and we knew it was going to happen. And Mario says, I actually grew to hate my father. And I couldn't wait till I could get out of the house. And it was like that until somebody planted a Nazarene church 3 blocks from our house. And somebody invited my dad to church. And my dad found Jesus Christ. And he says, my dad changed. And I was reluctant to really go to church until I saw that change. But when I did see that change, I went to church. And I as well found Jesus Christ to be my Savior. He says, I was called into full-time ministry to be a pastor, and now I'm a district superintendent. And he says, I go out in my district and I look across the mountains and I go to communities, and he says, I know that there's families in the exact same situation that my family was in. And it won't be until we take Jesus Christ to those families that things will change. We have the answer, and we've got to go out and take it to them. And so Pastor Mario is planting these churches, working with these kids. You know, they give them a list of 200 kids to start a church. I got to be honest, not all pastors want to start churches with just 200 kids. Most of them say, give me a few adults. Planting with 200 kids and going out and meeting their families and bringing them in. Pastor Mario says when we're building buildings and for places to have these churches and these kids meet, and he tells the parents, all the parents, they're required to work 1 day a month in the program on the church. Now, they're not skilled laborers, but they will go and move blocks or move sand or dig a ditch or whatever they can do to help. But you know, when we go with a work and witness team, those parents are there watching. Those parents are there asking, why are you here? Why did you come from the United States down here to build a building so that my child can have a place to get a meal and have a place to learn? Man, that's what work and witness is all about. The work's the easy part. It's the witness that's the hard part. A lot of people I talk to, I say, work and witness trip, and they immediately get stuck on the word work. And like, I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do the hard work, so I can't go on a trip. Man, I wish the Church of the Nazarene would swap that around and say, this is a witness and work team. And then people would get stuck on the witness word, and then the work is just what happens when you have time to do that. Those people in those communities, the witness that we are to them. And Mario's planting these churches, and the churches are growing. These families are coming to know Christ. And when Mario came to me in the beginning of this big idea, and he said, hey, we're going to have this new church planting thing, and I'm going to need some work teams to build me some buildings, my churches. And I listened to his idea, and I said, okay, Mario, tell me where the first one is. I want to go promote this. I want a team to come down. I want to help you out. And he said, well, I've got 5 places planned that I'm going to start. I said, I know, but tell me what the first one is. That's the one I got to start promoting. And he said, no, I'm starting all 5. And I said, Mario, you got to focus on one, and then when that one's going, you focus on the second one, and then you keep moving along. And he said, no, I really feel God is asking me to step out in faith and start all 5 of these. He says, I have the opportunity, and so I'm going to start these 5. And I know you don't have a way to get teams as fast as we need them to build all these buildings, but I believe that God has other resources, and he will make it possible that we can move forward on this. You know, when we left for the mission field 29 years ago, we thought, well, if we're leaving the country, we should at least tell my parents where we're going. I got mom and dad together, and they'd been Nazarenes probably since the beginning of the church. And I knew that they would be happy because I was going to be a Nazarene missionary. Who wouldn't be happy about that? And I said, Dad, we're going to leave. We're quitting our jobs. We're going to move. We're volunteers. We're going to Venezuela. I didn't realize that our daughters, 1 and 3, were going to be were at the time their only 2 grandkids. And we were taking them out of the country. And Dad took me aside that day and he said, John, you can't do this. You have a job, you have a family, you have insurance, you have kids. You can't just quit your jobs and move to South America. And all I could say that day was, Dad, I really don't have the answers you're looking for, because I have a lot of the same questions. But all I know is that God's asking us to step out in faith, and we've got to be obedient. And we've got to believe that he will take care and answer these questions that we have and that you have. And so Dad said, okay, well, we're going to be supportive. We're going to do our best to help you. And they did come down to Venezuela with some work teams and brought teams from their church, and they visited even. And I knew they were coming to see the grandkids, but that was all right. I'm going to do the same when I go see my grandson in Ecuador. But I realized looking back that Dad was kind of this negative voice, that he just didn't understand that God was calling me. And I realized when I look at Pastor Mario planting these churches, I was kind of that negative voice going, Mario, not 5, start with 1, then 2. Going with 5, that's just crazy, Mario. What I've realized is that when God asks us to step out in faith, He doesn't speak in a voice loud enough that those around us can hear it. He speaks to us individually, and we've got to respond. We've got to believe that He will equip us and enable us to do whatever He's asking us to do as we step out in faith. And I'm speaking as a missionary, and I'm speaking about the mission field and our call as we left and stepping out in faith. But if you listened, I didn't say if God asks us to step out in faith. I said when, because I believe it's a when. I believe that He is asking. And it might be a big step. It might be going to the mission field, going on a work trip. But it might be a small step. It might be just go invite our neighbors to church. And some people will say, well, we do that. That's not really a step of faith. Well, no, for some people it's not. But for other people, it very well could be. And that might be where we start. And I believe that we come back to the States, and we've been coming back every 2 years, and as we go around and speak in different areas, I've come to believe that outside the walls of every one of our Nazarene churches, it's a mission field. Even this one, I don't know this area, but I believe it's a mission field right outside these walls. And if this is a mission field, and you're here, that makes you the missionaries here. What are we doing? Are we stepping out in faith? In Ephesians, it says that God is able to do immeasurably more than we can ask or imagine. Man, what are we asking? What are we imagining for our churches, for our neighborhoods, for our families? Are we asking? Man, God wants to do beyond that. He just wants to do more than what we can even imagine. But we gotta be imagining. We got to be asking. I believe that God is ready to move, ready to do these things, but He's waiting for us to step out in faith, whatever that might look like. And I believe God has great things for us as we do step out in faith. And I believe the greatest, it feels so good when you get done, you've accomplished something, but we really can't ever say, look what I was able to do, because we didn't do it, God did it. All we can say is glory to God what He was able to do when I just said yes and allowed myself to be used by Him. So I'm going to finish with a challenge, basically the same question that was asked of me some 30 years ago that we've been trying to live by continually. When is the last time that you've stepped out in faith, not knowing how you would accomplish what God was asking you to do unless you allowed God to work through you and get you there? It's an exciting way to live. I believe God wants us daily to be going, hey, God, what do you got for me today that I can be out there or out of what I can do, but what you're going to do through me? Inviting people to church, talking to the neighbor, sharing Christ with them. Steps of faith. It could be long distance, could be local, could be our families, but God wants us stepping out in faith. Thank you.